Buenas semanas, situas. Good morning, colleagues. Yamina 36 na legislature in Guam is back in session. We are on item 18, which is consideration of the daily file. The items on third reading. Bill number 277-36 COR. Clerks, please read the title.
Bill number 277-36 COR, as amended by the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture, and further amended on the floor. Introduced by Therese M. Terlahi, Telo T. Taidagui, Sabina Flores Perez, Selena Cruz Nelson, Christopher M. Duenas, Joanne Brown. An act to add a new Article 2 to Chapter 75A of Title 21, Guam Code Annotated, relative to authorizing the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, CLTC, to enter into commercial submerged lands license agreements, and to be known as the Guam Undersea Access for Homes Act, GUAHA.
Roll call.
Senator Atta. Senator Atta, aye. Senator Blas.
Madam Speaker, I move to excuse members not present for voting.
On the motion to excuse members who are not present for voting, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Senator Blas excused. Senator Brown. Senator Brown, aye. Senator Duenas. Senator Duenas, aye. Senator Moylan. Senator Moylan, aye. Vice Speaker Muñoz-Barnes. Vice Speaker Muñoz-Barnes, aye. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson excused. Senator Perez. Senator Perez, aye. Senator Rogel. Senator Rogel, aye. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, aye. Senator Shelton. Senator Shelton excused. Senator Taidagui. Senator Taidagui, aye. Senator Terlahi. Senator Terlahi, aye. Speaker Terlahi. Speaker Terlahi, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, aye.
Bill number 277-36 COR received 12 ayes, 0 nays, and 3 excused. Bill number 277-36 COR is duly passed by the body. Sitio Wasi colleagues. We'll now resume with the second reading file. Oh, Vice, yes.
Colleagues, we are now on Bill number 278-36 COR, is introduced by Speaker Therese M. Terlahi. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Bill number 278-36 COR, which I authored. It's an act to amend Section 75A124 of Chapter 75A, Title 21, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the Chamorro Land Trust Survey and Infrastructure Fund, into the third reading file, and I would like to speak on this motion.
Manana Sidula, Speaker, please proceed.
Thank you. So this bill number 278 is a companion legislation to Bill 277 that we just passed, and it's an it designates that revenues and fees and interest generated from the commercial submerged land license agreements be deposited into the CLTC Survey and Infrastructure Fund to be used for the purposes of the fund. This fund outlines the purposes currently to be for the subdivision, surveying, mapping, and registration of tracts of residential and agricultural land in the CLTC property inventory, and the construction of infrastructure to include access roads, water and power utilities to service CLTC residential and agricultural tracts of land. This bill adds sewer to the types of infrastructure allowed under this fund. And that is, of course, because we want these to be sanitary residential properties, but also because adding sewer into these properties allows the CLTC to divide the properties up smaller and thereby issue more leases, double the amount of leases, in some cases. And so that's the ultimate goal of this. We also added telecommunications resources. And that was based on our discussions with these telecommunications companies, that they believed if we are going to be the hub for high-speed internet cables, and that we are professing that high-speed internet cables is going to lift Guam up and allow additional businesses to proffer, and that these resources should in fact be extended to these residential areas. So I did add in telecommunications resources, and as we saw during the pandemic and the relief that was issued by Congress, they did also make it a priority in their infrastructure funds, their education funds, that they want internet services available to the public. We also saw during the pandemic that internet services were actually vital to application for some of the assistance programs, filing of tax refunds when we were under public distancing mandates, and for many other purposes, for homeschooling. So this is, of course, will be ultimately up to the discretion of the Chamorro Land Trust, which one they're going to prioritize. Of course, I think there's an order of things. First, they have to survey the properties, and they have to determine whether they're going to put sewer in or not, and that will tell them whether they can divide them up into quarter-acre or half-acre lots. And so hopefully that's a straightforward bill, and I would ask my colleagues to support this. I just want to give you a little bit of background on this infrastructure fund. The most recent collection report that collected $110 for the month of June, $89 for the month of July, $17,000 for the year to date. We are hoping, of course, that the revenues from submerged cables will significantly increase these amounts so that they can actually have sufficient amounts to even contemplate any of these, including surveying. It's quite costly. There was a time when this surveying and infrastructure fund was raided by the executive branch and used for other purposes. We have followed up with this. It has not been replenished, and otherwise the revenues that go into this are really from the sale of blue cart trails or other remnants of property, and so it's not a huge revenue source prior to the passage of Bill 277. So I would ask my colleagues to support this, that this bill will dedicate the funds to these additional purposes: sewer and telecommunications access. Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Speaker Terlahi. Are there anyone wishing to speak on the amendment? I have Senator Joe San Augustine and then the Minority Leader. Senator Joe, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have a question before I speak on the bill. With the author yield reference to the size of the lots, because you mentioned that the properties may be reduced, and my understanding with sewage is you're really not touching the property. It's normally on the main road, and then they just connect. So I just wanted to make sure that it's not something where they're going to end up reducing when the easement allows that infrastructure to be brought in.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Speaker Terlahi, would you like to yield?
Yes, I would yield, and I thank the previous speaker for that question. It's a great question. Of course, where there is infrastructure in proximity, we want that to be utilized right away, and they shouldn't even need this bill to do that, and we've been pushing them to get those in place. Yes, and so when they do their planning for these subdivisions, it hasn't really been done in previous years, but the plan is that they're going to actually plan subdivisions with access, which has also been an issue, and sewer. And when I say making the lots smaller, no, it's not to bring in the sewer. It's the law requires that if you don't have sewer, you have to have a minimum half-acre lot, which takes up a lot of the CLTC land, versus if you have sewer, you can build a house on a quarter-acre lot. And so really it's that. It's to say you can divide it up smaller, not that the sewer is taking up the space, but that they can divide those residential lots smaller according to our existing law. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. Senator Joe San Augustine, you're good. Minority Leader, Senator Duenas, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, and I certainly rise in full support of 27736. And I wanted to take an opportunity as I discuss why I support this bill to kind of go back to the companion legislation that we just voted on and passed unanimously. Madam Chair, I had an opportunity to speak to some folks and receive some messages on chats over the weekend when they were reading the details of the PDN article that discussed the bill that we were discussing and just passed. And some folks, kind of looked at it as, wow, are we implementing a tax? Will this cost be passed along? And I had to vigorously say to those folks, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues was on a companion chat and indicated that all three companies that testified on this bill and others said that this has no impact on local exchange. As a matter of fact, these cables coming through Guam, Madam Chair, are an enhancement to the local exchange, but predominantly to connect Asia through the oceans, fundamentally to CONUS, the U.S. and other jurisdictions, what really enhances the capabilities of this technology. So really it is the larger companies and the big businesses that are dumping in millions and millions of dollars to bring this pass-through and enhance the pass-through technology going forward through Guam and out to major markets. Madam Chair, this money that's been, that we've agreed on in terms of the negotiations and the fees, Madam Chair, this is market rate. This is the cost of doing business, and as our good speaker mentioned when she was discussing 278 or 277, was that the issue here in her aggressiveness and seeing that this was market rate was due to the research of her staff and others that put the bill together, that was not trying to implement and overcharge, if you will, businesses and the business activity associated with this, but more so as ensuring that now submerged lands, which are in the inventory of the government of Guam, can be put to a use where we can finally realize a significant funding source to once and for all, hopefully going forward, provide the surveys, the infrastructure, and really to make sure that this program, decades ago, under the Chamorro Land Trust that was put in place, can truly now be a showcase in terms of, government, public-private relationships, using resources. And, it's kind of interesting as we discuss this, we've put sewer in here. It's going to be the Chamorro Land Trust and those opportunities that will be pioneering this now in lots, I'm sure. Because we know, Madam Chair, many of these properties are in the north, are in a place where they're over the aquifer. And we will be now saying, we're going to make sure the sanitation is there, to make sure we protect the aquifer. We're going to be pioneering that through, even in the same paper over the weekend, Madam Chair, you probably read the same article where a family's stuck now with a parental subdivision piece of property that's been issued, and they cannot, because it's undersized, they cannot utilize it, because it's not capable of handling the septic system required. So there's so much more that's involved here, but I'm just proud of us going forward. But in closing on this bill, Madam Chair, I'm so proud of us being very explicit about the fact that we are not going to take these resources and utilize them for any other purpose but the sole purpose of supporting infrastructure and the capabilities of thousands of families to finally realize the promise that was made by this government to allow eligible recipients to be able to realize that dignity of having a roof over their head and an area that is suitable, just like every other person developing their property should be. Madam Chair, also, I just wanted to share one thing. A lot of folks have discussed with me as we're moving forward, and we've made so many strides now in terms of really putting in place good things for the CLTC properties. And one person mentioned, hey, how does that affect the markets overall and the like, when we do this? And I said, Chamorro Land Trust recipients, these are people, for the most part, probably who would have a very difficult time realizing the dignity and the opportunity of home ownership and a substantial structure and a roof over their head. I said, this has no effect, in my opinion, and I've done the research at Guam Housing. You know what Guam Housing Corporation and others have done over the years. This has no impact really on the real estate market for those who have means and the ability to provide for their families. This is truly taking care of our people. It's a promise that we made and a promise that needs to be delivered. But the fact is, too, think about it, and we've seen this through Guam Housing, Madam Chair. When I was there, the revenues were dwindling, and the reason why was because during the favorable interest rate, so many people who realized their dream of home ownership through Guam Housing were actually going out and financing in the private sector. It shrunk our portfolio, but we were proud because we said that's exactly what the design of this program was for. And you should see the look on these people's faces when they pay off their loan at Guam Housing and they've refinanced at one of the local banks. That's what this stuff is all about, Madam Chair. It's about giving an opportunity for everyone to share in the dignity and the opportunity. I hope that when I'm old someday, well, I'm old now, but older, and I'm down at my dream farm that I want to build soon, down on Cross Island, I really hope that I'm reading in the paper how, Chamorro Land Trust recipients are now building their house outside because their family, has gained more resources, and now that home that they'll be leaving will be for another family going into it. I dream of that day, Madam Chair, because that's really what we're doing here. But what we're really doing here, too, is making sure that not one penny of this money should ever be touched for any other purpose except for this purpose. And so this law should serve to ensure that, Madam Chair, and I'm going to be proud to vote for this just as much as I was proud to vote for the previous legislation. To Deus Masi for the opportunity to speak on this important piece of legislation, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Titlegy, you are recognized.
Sidus Mase, Madam Speaker, and good morning to you and my colleagues. Madam Speaker, I have an amendment for this, for Bill 278. But before I speak on the amendment, I want to thank the Speaker for all her work she's done with the Submarine Cable Task Force, the meetings they've been doing, but most especially now utilizing the funding that's coming from these justifiable fees for submarine cables landing on Guam, and it's just the beginning. Technology is growing so much, and because we're strategically located with that American flag that provides that stability in law governing us, it is an incentive for these multi-billion-dollar companies to land their cables here. We know that when cables are extended for a long length of miles, it slows down the speed. But by stopping in certain locations and rebooting and then shooting it out again, it provides faster speed in this mechanism. So Guam is strategically, we're the gateway to Asia, the US gateway to Asia, and this is the opportunity for us to do this responsibly. You know, we have the environment we have to think of when laying these cables down, and I think the good speaker has done that when incorporating the last bill that we passed here just this morning to provide that safety mechanism in place. Now here we are at a juncture where an area of the government in which we can provide certain infrastructure and to build certain areas under the Chamorro Land Trust that lack sewer, that lack the power, the infrastructure, the roads to go through. Because unfortunately, if you look at the fiscal note, well, actually it doesn't have it. I went a little bit further and looked at the balance of this account, and it's only about $17,000, Madam Speaker, as of June FY 2022. Only $17,000. And we all know the cost it's going to incur to build infrastructure, to lay these power lines, the sewer lines, to provide the roads in these areas. It's going to be a lot more than that. We all know that construction cost is skyrocketed, and I don't see it lowering anytime soon. We're not even at the peak of the military buildup. So this is an opportunity now that we can actually fund. We have the money now to fund these projects. But I want to make sure that it's not limited to. So Madam Speaker, if everyone can look at on your drive, which has been placed by the clerks, thank you so much, on line 9 to 11, page 2. I'd like to incorporate the amendment should read, and subdivision improvements, which include but are not limited to storm drainage facilities, curbs, gutters, and sidewalks. That's the inclusion to the sewer and power and utilities for telecommunication resources. We don't want to leave out these very critical infrastructure in building subdivisions, the sidewalks, the gutters, and even in some cases, recreational facilities. But this is just to ensure that we don't leave out any part of improvements for subdivisions. So I've incorporated this, and Madam Speaker, subdivision improvements is in Guam Code Annotated 21, Title 21, Chapter 62 under subdivision law. The definition for improvements reads, any beneficial or valuable site additions or alternatives to a subdivision properly, including street grading and surfacing, water services, sanitary, sewers, and drainage. So we are covering all angles to ensure that these areas on the Chamorro Land Trust is properly and environmentally set up for our families who have been long awaiting for property, for a home for their families. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator Tadagui. On the amendment, Senator Jolson Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to ask the author that maybe you might want to strike gutters, because gutters are referring to homes. I understand the curb and the storm drainage and the sidewalks. I fully support those other parts, but gutters, I looked up the definitions referring to homes, so you might want to strike that one out. But I understand what she was getting at. It was probably referring to the drainage.
So Senator San Augustine, are you moving to delete, or will you yield back?
I'd like to yield a quick
We'll
recess.
take a moment's recess. Put street. Yamina Trentastash and the legislature in Guam is back from recess. Senator San Agustin, I will acknowledge you at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. After speaking with the author of the amendment, if we can just amend the word gutter, the word before it would be street. It would say street gutters. So it's referring to basically how the water runs off and goes into storm drainage.
Thank you. On that amendment to the Titagui amendment, Senator Titagui, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have no objections at all. I think it's very clear. There is a difference between a gutter from a home that's usually on the roof of a home, and then there's one on the street. So thank
Okay.
you for that clarification and appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Are there anyone else wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. On the Titagui amendment as amended, are there anyone wishing to speak? If not, Senator Parrish, on the Titagui amendment as amended, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment, and I think it's so important to have more of a holistic approach when it comes to development, housing development especially, because what we're seeing is that there's a lot of, housing developments that are under 5 houses, and so a lot of this on-site drainage facilities are not created, and we've seen the effect of that. There's flooding in the north where there shouldn't be any flooding. This is highly, porous limestone, and we just want to make sure that we're doing the right types of planning. So I rise in support of this. Sus Masi.
Buen provecho, Senator Parrish. Anyone wishing to speak on the amendment to the Titagui amendment? As amended. If not, are there any objections? Senator Titagui, would you like to close or ask for the vote? On the motion, on the Titagui amendment as amended, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. On the main motion, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Speaker Terlayi, you may close. Oh. On the main motion, Senator San Agustin.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I just rise in support of the bill, and I thank the author and for the amendments that were included. It helped refine the bill. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Anyone else? Senator Clinton Rachel on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of the measure, and I'd like to commend the author for all of her hard work on both this bill and the previous bill that we just passed before we began discussions on this bill. I think the two companion bills work together great, and hopefully this will lead to creating a money source that can really be used for the Chamorro Land Trust properties so that we can start getting more and more people onto Chamorro Land Trust properties. And I know one of the biggest stumbling blocks to getting people onto Chamorro Land Trust properties is the lack of funding for things like the surveys, things like infrastructure, and the other things that are really necessary to develop the properties and get them ready to be used by the people of Guam. So I commend the author for all of her hard work on both measures, and I rise in full support of the measure, and I hope that one day we can see the Chamorro Land Trust properties truly being utilized by the Chamorro people of Guam. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator Rangel. Thank you very much. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Parrish on the main motion, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the bill, and just to kind of reinforce a lot of the statements that my colleagues have made. Yes, Chamorro Land Trust is turning a new leaf, and we're moving it into the 21st century. I think it's great that having settled the lawsuit, we're moving forward with handing out the licenses or the leases, as well as looking forward to developing these areas in a holistic sort of fashion. And it just makes sense that the revenue that's being generated from these leases is going towards homes, living homes that our community needs. So thank you, and I rise in support.
You're very welcome, Senator Perez. Are there anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? If not, Speaker Chalahi, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank all my colleagues for their remarks on this bill, which I felt were very good and filled in some gaps that we hadn't discussed, including whether this bill or the previous bill were going to cost any of Guam's taxpayers any additional money. And the answer is no, that these increased submerged cable licenses fees should not impact local residents or local businesses. In fact, having additional submerged licenses might actually create greater competition. And so we're hoping to benefit from that. We, of course, are hoping to benefit that because of the high speeds that are being brought into Guam and landed here and shot back out, but those that are landed here, that if we can capitalize on that with new industry, that will absolutely benefit us with employment and other revenue. So I want to thank my colleague for bringing that up. I also want to mention that it is absolutely the intent of this bill, by adding sewer to infrastructure, to critical infrastructure for CLTC, that we want to increase the amount of lots that these large tracts can be divided into, the increase the number of residences that can be built, and protect our aquifer at the same time, which is a huge issue for the northern huge tracts of land that we have, which are most of the largest tracts. This bill will then allow the building of communities, and I think that's really why I'm so very happy with my colleagues' remarks, because yes, that's what we are here trying to do. We're not just trying to build one house, but we're trying to build up entire communities with subdivisions and all the improvements that subdivisions need, and not to, we don't want anyways, yeah, we don't want that substandard that we've seen. We want to raise those standards. And so this two bills will do this. This bill in particular will allow us, and it is actually addressing a huge audit finding, which was that CLTC's ability to conduct surveys and utility installations to leased properties due to lack of funding sources is a continued challenge. So we're hoping when this money is received that we are going to be able to address these longstanding challenges, and that in the interim that the CLTC continues to do what we expect it to do, and that is to continue with the land registrations that are necessary, the subdivisions that they are able to do with in-house staff, with ARP funds. I think they received about $600,000 with infrastructure funds that are still pending, how those are going to be utilized on Guam, but I think we have a great case for using infrastructure funds to bring sewer out, not just to CLTC properties, but to many properties on Guam into those areas so that businesses can thrive and residences can thrive, and we can meet our affordable housing need with sewer. I would also like at this time to add sponsors to this bill, to include Senators Telo Taitugui, Chris Duenas, Sabina Perez, Senator Josan Augustine, and Senator Clinton Rangel. Thank you, Senator, on that motion.
Thank you. On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Speaker.
Thank you, and I'd like to move that bill number 278-36 COR as amended by the committee and amended on the floor be passed into third reading file.
On the motion to move Bill 278-36 COR to the third reading voting file, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. We're going to take a moment's recess to work with the clerks.
284? It's okay. We're back from recess. We are now under second reading on Bill number 284-36LS. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to accept substitute version of Bill 284-36LS as amended by the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, Statistics, Research and Planning, introduced by myself, Senator Perez, and co-sponsored by Senator Teloti Taitigui, Jose Pito Terlahi, Vice Speaker Tina Rose Mooney Barnes, is an act to amend Article 3, Chapter 51, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, and to codify and amend Article 3 of Chapter 24, Division 4, Title 22, Guam Rules and Regulations relative to promoting recycling and zero waste initiatives.
Senator Perez, can you please clarify? They've been passed out one that says as amended by the committee and substituted on the floor, but you only said amended by the committee.
And substitute on the floor.
Okay, so Bill number 284-36LS as amended by the committee and substituted on the floor. This is the version that's been passed out on the floor.
Yes,
Is
that's
there any
correct.
objection to the motion to substitute the bill on the floor? Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If the author of the legislation can just point out the differences of what was in the introduced version versus the substituted version on the floor.
Senator Perez, would you yield?
Yes, thank you for that question. So the two things were to codify the rules and regs, and the second thing was to add more accountability measures, which is in Section 51302. So in that, the language that was added was, the administrator of Guam Environmental Protection Agency shall present the budget to the Guam EPA Board of Directors. This is on my page 10. This is line 16. So basically, the administrator shall present the budget to the Board of Directors, and expenditures shall be reported quarterly to Y Legislature and Guahan. And everything else is, well, there was a stylistic changes, and I believe, hold on one sec. Just a moment's recess.
We'll take a 1-minute recess. We're back from recess. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the other change was to strike out on line 19 and 20, which was found redundant. And so it's really to clean up the bill is what mostly what it was, and to strengthen it.
All right, and according to the clerks, a markup version has also been posted up on the drive. All right, so on the motion to accept the substituted on the floor version, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, on the main motion to put the bill into third reading, you may proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Bill 284-36 LS as amended by the Committee on Environment, Revenue, and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning, and substituted on the floor into the third reading file, and I would like to discuss.
Please proceed.
Bill 284-36, also known as the Guam Zero Waste Act, aims to modernize local statutes and to catalyze the island-wide implementation of recycling and zero waste programs and drastically improve much-needed recycling and cleanup processes that are currently costly and inefficient. The global recycling industry has changed significantly in the last 16 years since the Recycling Revolving Fund was established. While traditional recycling models are no longer financially sustainable, newer zero waste initiatives are proving successful. The Guam Zero Waste Act expands upon the principles of traditional recycling by focusing on overall waste reduction, circular use of materials, and promotes the implementation of innovative solutions to significantly extend the life of our landfill. Bill 284 authorizes Guam EPA to expand programs using the Recycling Revolving Fund for the following: developing a zero waste master plan and a holistic government island-wide implementation plan to reach 50% by 2035 and 70% by 2045, in addition to evaluating the effectiveness of zero waste and recycling programs. It establishes a zero waste grants program with 3 tiers. Tier 1 grants are above 50, but not to exceed 100,000. Tier 2 grants are above 25, but not to exceed 50,000, and Tier 3 grants are up to 25,000. It also authorizes reimbursement to Guam Solid Waste Authority of up to 400,000 in accordance with the Guam Zero Waste Master Plan for curbside recycling and for the collection and processing and shipping of household hazardous waste, electronic white goods, and white goods upon approval by the board. It prioritizes plastic along with the abandoned vehicles and white goods due to the uncertainty of global recyclers accepting plastics under the implementation of the Basel Convention. It also builds Guam EPA's capacity by allowing the use of 10% of its funds for administration and implementation. Bill 284-36 increases accountability by requiring recipients of the funds to receive training for environmental and ethics laws and compliance of these laws. It aims to make Recycling Revolving Fund a non-lapsing fund to be used for the express purposes as stated by law. It also recognizes the importance of the Mayor's Council of Guam's island-wide cleanup program by including zero waste initiatives, and it also affords the option of utilizing the Department of Public Works to contract with private recycling companies on behalf of the Mayor's Council. Additionally, Bill 284 moves the fees from GCA to GAR without any changes in fees. Localized solutions and investments are needed now to address global changes in recycling in order to transform our waste into resources, reduce our ecological footprint, protect communities, and preserve resources and ecosystems both locally and globally. And we can achieve this by closing the loop using zero waste initiatives with the expansion and coordination of personal and collective environmental stewardship within the public and private sectors. Zero waste is an environmental justice issue that involves making mindful consumer choices that include to switching to alternative products that are non-toxic and that uses less of the Earth's resources that benefit not only our environment and health on people on Guam, but also those communities in which the products are manufactured. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency is in support of this bill. And since they state, since the promulgation of the Recycling Revolving Fund rules and regs in 2019, the government of Guam has seen an increase in fiscal discipline associated with the Recycling Revolving Fund expenditures. Gone are the days of question transfers authorized and question costs covered at the expense of the Recycling Revolving Fund. Since the passage of Guam Public Law 3537, thousands of tons of eligible material has been removed from the island as a result of our collaboration with the governor, the legislature, and the mayor's council of Guam. We can all agree that there is more work that needs to be done, even as we acknowledge the amount of junk vehicles, tires, white goods, and batteries that has been properly disposed of. They state, through our support of Bill 284-36, we hope to see further evolution of the Recycling Revolving Fund as we transition to increased awareness of zero waste principles with greater opportunities for enhanced services to our community. So truly embracing proactive measures such as zero waste that prioritizes the health of our people and environment and aids in diversifying our economy is part of our responsibility and cultural practice of Inafa Malik, which is essential to restoring balance with the environment that sustains us. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Senators Teloti Taitigui, Jose Pito Terlahi, and Vice Speaker Tina Rose Mooney Barnes. And I ask in advance the support of my colleagues, Situas Masi.
Situas Masi. Senator, on the bill, is there anyone who'd like to be recognized on the bill? Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I certainly appreciate the initiative of the author. He certainly outlined all the positive sides with regards to this bill and questions I brought up during the public hearing previously. I appreciate the fact Guam Epa is, enthusiastic to pursue this, and if you really look at it from a simplistic view, I'm assuming we're simply looking at reprioritizing how money from the recycling fund is going to be spent with the title of the intention for zero waste. But I do have questions, and I don't know why we're not looking at this bill a little more further with regards to how it's actually going to operate. But I do want to ask of the author, because again, the duties with regards to administering these grants fall under Guam Epa, and I did have concerns about the fact that Guam Epa as a regulatory agency is really in the business of doing environmental enforcement, and I think we don't need to look very far outside in our community to see that there's still a greater need for that with regards to the main missions and the purposes as to which Guam Epa was originally created. And so while I don't, maybe we can say no problem, let's simply add on additional responsibilities and let's hope it all works out. But I did want to ask, how does the author distinguish to clarify that issue for a regulatory agency that's primary duty and mission is to address enforcement, now to be involved in administering grants to potential recipients who the agency is going to have to address enforcement on? So this, to me, kind of muddies the waters a little bit with regards to what the authorities of the agency are, which should be their primary authority to ensure protection of our environment, which, as I mentioned, let us not look far. We can see environmental degradation that the agency is not effectively enforcing. So I did want to ask the author if she'd yield to that question. How is the administrator going to segregate these additional responsibilities that are now being granted to administer these grants, and then also at the same time have to address potential enforcement on these companies that these grants are being given to? Because this is a whole other layer that's never been traditionally part of the structure of Guam Epa.
Would the author yield to that question?
Yes, yes I do, and thank you for that question. I think that's such an important issue, and that's something that I really thought about in creating this bill. And so some of the things that are included in this bill is the general terms and conditions regarding ethical requirements and the consequences of not following ethical requirements, as well as compliance. So as a condition of use of the funds, the recipient must have the required permits. So they need to have the training up front, the permits up front, the ethical understanding up front. I can also add that US EPA has set a roadmap. They themselves not only regulate environmental laws, they have a grants program, grants coordinators. And so in speaking with Guam EPA, I did bring this up multiple times, and they also referred to how US EPA has the grants program in addition to regulating these environmental laws. So there is a procedure in place that a model that they can look to ensure that they can accommodate both roles. As we know, for instance, like the Superfund sites, Superfund itself, they give grants to not just government agencies, but to community organizations. And so there is a path, there is a model to follow. The other thing that this bill does, it also requires the promulgation of rules and regs. And this is where the community can come in and weigh in on conflict of interest, any concerns. And so there are multiple ways to address this. It's already some of it's in the bill itself, some of it's practiced already by US EPA, and as well as the community can come and weigh in when it comes time for the rules and regs to be developed. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, if I can further ask, since we don't have the ability to ask the questions, if we had be able to sit down and directly ask these questions if we have a committee of the whole. So I'm just going to have to go back and forth then. The sponsor had mentioned that, yes, granted, Guam EPA, has a grants division. Is Guam EPA, I mean, US EPA does, is Guam EPA adding additional capacity and their staffing resources? Because one of the biggest complaints we hear over and over again, as we heard in the budget, with regards to their budget, is they are understaffed and have limited resources. Guam EPA is no bigger than it was when I was a deputy there 30 years ago. So are there additional resources being put in place to administer these grants and this overall program that we're adding on to them, if the sponsor would yield?
Would the sponsor yield to that question?
Yes, I do, and thank you for that question. So in the bill itself, they have, currently there's only funding for one FTE. And so what this bill does is it allows the administrator to spend 10% of the fund to administer the fund. So it's, it was contemplated that there is going to be a need of additional resources to carry this out. And so we did provide the resources within the bill itself.
Again, Madam Speaker, since we don't have a forum, I'm going to ask, with regards, if the author would yield, what is the current amount on an annual basis of this recycling fund that we're giving the Guam EPA and the administrator oversight over to distribute?
Would the author yield to that question?
Yes, I do. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see, because I've been following the Recycling Revolving Fund for some time. And I think back in 2019 it was 2.8 million, and then I believe in the previous budget it went down to 2.7, and now it's down to like 2.5 million. So yeah, we're seeing a decrease in the fund right now, but it roughly it's over $2 million. $2 million.
I also wanted to ask, Madam Speaker, with regards on page 18, section 5107, adjustment of recycling fees, because I do appreciate there's portions of this, and this came up also during the public hearing, where the administrator was given sole authority to be able to move monies around, which I raised concern, because I think when you have a board, you should get the concurrence of the board to do so. But in this particular case, adjustment of recycling fees, it indicates that the administrator shall review the fees authorized by this section supra, I'm not even going to bother reading, but every 24 months, and is authorized to adjust the fee by not more than 25% in accordance with the administrative adjudication law. I wanted to inquire with regards to that, is this something that the board should concur on versus simply the administrator, particularly with regards to fees? I mean, 25% on anything to me is substantial. So would the sponsor yield to that question?
Would the sponsor yield to that question?
Yes, I do. And so that's what's currently in law. We didn't change any wording in regards to the fees. We didn't change the fees. What was changed is that it was moved from GCA to GAR, with the intent that should Guam EPA change their schedule of fees all around, we do it through the promulgation, the AAA process, rather than having to go through the legislature. So that was the intent of this change. It wasn't changing any fee or any language in what's currently in statute.
Madam Speaker, I also have an additional question with regards to the recycles that are being sent off island. I mean, back in not too long ago, we ideally thought that was the process. We would simply provide our recycling material and send it to other jurisdictions, and they would have the facilities and the resources to be able to process it and reuse it. You know, we want to buy things where it's recycled paper, recycled cardboard, recycled plastics. Are we verifying or requiring verification with the use of any of these funds if the ultimate destination of these materials are going to actually be properly processed? Because at the other end, we're also hearing of not just, you know, Guam, we're a very small little part of the world, but we have other jurisdictions that are taking their recycling to other countries, what we often refer to as third world countries, only to find out that these waste or recycling materials are actually not being processed and are being dumped in these jurisdictions, from clothing, plastics, aluminum, steel, without verification. And unfortunately for companies that bring this over and accept it, you know, they take the money and they disappear, and these other communities are left with this waste material, particularly from what we classify and identify as Western countries. And so do we have any means of requiring verification, not only that they're delivering it elsewhere and that they're paying someone else to take this material, but is there any type of evidence that we're requiring that these materials are actually being processed so that we are not also in our goodness to want to do the good thing? And trust me, I was into recycling and environment before it was popular. But I also want to make sure that we're not creating other problems in other jurisdictions, since many places in the U.S. actually do process their recycling. They do it within the state that they're in, and they're not taking it out to other countries. But in Guam, that's not the case. I mean, there's very little actual recycling that's going on of any of these materials here, even though the capability is there to do it. We don't do it here. We don't recycle plastics, which we could do. We're not crushing glass that we could probably incorporate into asphalt paving and things of that nature. So I just wanted to ask, what verification are we having, since we are using public money to take these materials off island? If the sponsor would yield.
Okay, there were several things in there. So I know one of them was, how do we know where the recycling materials, if they're ending up where we expect it to end up? And I believe one of my colleagues is going to propose an amendment on the floor, so that would address that issue. But currently what we have in the bill is that, you know, one of the things that we saw with the misuse of the Recycling Revolving Fund was that we wanted to make sure there was documentation that it was being taken on a ship. And so that's why we included the bill lating, but I understand that we also want to be assured that its destination is also documented, and that's going to be proposed by a colleague. And yeah, so that will be addressed shortly. In regards to, you know, zero waste, I mean, this is something that its time has come. And we know that, you know, G3, with the efforts of G3, they've raised a lot of interest as well as efforts within the community. You know, we have Micronesian Climate Change Alliance. They have their precious plastics where they're taking plastic from that would have normally become part of the landfill, and they're making products out of that. And so there's a lot of models out there. You know, the bioblocks. The bioblocks is another thing that's coming on the scene, where they're going to, you know, divert some of these things that are harder to ship off island and to actually make it a resource. And that's what really the intent of this bill is, that we need to start making these localized solutions, because no more can we rely on these destinations and, you know, the whims of these markets, right? We have to be able to be in control of what, you know, of our waste. And I think the other part of zero waste is reduction. So what we import into the island, we have to increase the measures. And I think, you know, there's a change happening as far as modernization and automation of our ports. So we can now, you know, almost itemize to a T what's coming in and what can we, how can we see that as a resource? How can we reduce packaging? So that's what the Zero Waste Bill does too. It also identifies extended producer responsibility. So it's basically a start to transition, at least in law, to transition towards this circular economy. And that's what this does. It's really to create that, promote that idea that, yes, we can't rely on the old ways of doing things. We have to come up with these new ways, such as zero waste. And this is what this bill, the intent of this bill does, and what this bill would do is to make sure that we are moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and certainly to the sponsor. I mean, I recognize her desire to want to minimize waste and ensure a more, compatible environment that we can live in and exist in. And I certainly hope, in this case, hope that Guam EPA will be able to effectively implement this legislation. Probably the only thing we'll know is when time will tell, and effective oversight with regards to this, but it doesn't sound like much resources being provided to the agency to address this additional responsibility. I only bring that up, Madam Speaker, because again, when we go around our community and we see so many other areas that outright lack proper enforcement by Guam EPA, these are good, feel-good things, and I feel good about all these things. I think they're important, and I think as life goes on out of necessity, we're probably going to have to properly address how we address waste disposal. I don't think the old days of continuing to dig a hole in the ground and bury it is the ultimate solution. And unfortunately for Guam, because we've had so much issues and gosh, I don't even know how to begin to describe the incinerator issue that I spent most of my last term in the Guam Legislature fighting with the late Senator Ben Pangilinan because of the, again, moneyed interest is always interesting because those that want it, need it, desire it, and don't hesitate to want to use and abuse public resource to do it, that doesn't become a viable option. That technology has gotten very old, unfortunately. But again, I don't want to just look at it, we're just passing another bill that we can feel good about and saying this is going to help our environment unless we actually put the resources in place to do that. And having worked at Guam EPA, I spent a good 4 years there in the inner workings of Guam EPA, of knowing the challenge that exists, and also knowing that while we talk about wanting to support the environment, that is one agency in the government of Guam that has not grown. Unlike DPW that's severely become, decreased from a large agency to a medium agency, Guam EPA has not grown in 30 years. And when we want to add on additional responsibilities that I think take away from the main mission of that agency to address proper enforcement, especially when we continue to see the lack of it, continue to see the dumping and the illegal dumping that's happening in our community on a regular basis, the trash that's on the side of the road, and the lack of follow-through and the lack of involvement to the degree when you have constituents, as I do, calling my office, complaining about these issues, complaining about the lack of enforcement, and I'm not in a direct position to address that enforcement these days. We want to add on these other things, and yeah, it feels good, it sounds good. If we're able to effectively implement it, I think it's going to be wonderful. But the core operations of the agency are not being delivered to our community. So be mindful, colleagues, when you continue, as we continue to add on more and more layers, because we want to champion these issues and we want to get recognized for it and make sure our names are attached to it. But this does still, you're just simply going to add one employee to implement this, and yet the actual operations of the agency, with all the billion-dollar budget we have now that we're bragging about, that now I'm glad to hear some of my colleagues saying, oh, let's be cautious, let's not spend more money now because we've already reached the level at the bank, we've already exceeded now probably our appropriation to add to cash. What should be a feel-good thing? I would feel better if there were more resources provided, especially to the agency during the budget. That didn't happen. And yes, I know about the abilities of US EPA and their grants because it is US EPA, it is the federal taxpayer that's actually funding environmental enforcement on Guam. It's not the Guam Legislature. We simply just allow them to access the fees that they charge, but we don't support environmental protection and enforcement on the island. And junk cars, my goodness, what village doesn't see it? I'm sure, our good Vice Speaker and I see it every day coming to work, the moment we drive down the hill from our house, right? I go up to Jonia, there's another abandoned vehicle. You go left or right around, that's becoming the standard. And then where is the enforcement? We charge registration to our people every year to go up. You're mandated, you must go up and register your vehicles, and you get charged all these fees. And yet we have no enforcement in the ability to identify who owns a vehicle and ensure that the owner of that vehicle is properly cited and is charged to pay for the disposal of that vehicle. It ends up becoming another pocket of the government, that the people's money again that has to pay because we have some irresponsible people, but more so the concern I have is the mechanism within the government itself to enforce its own laws. Every year we have to go pay for the registration of our vehicle. Nice is becoming a little more convenient to do it, but then the government of Guam and Rev and Tax can't identify who the owners are to address proper enforcement. And now the standard is if you don't want your car, just dump it on the side of the road. And then hopefully it'll get cannibalized. And then what's left, hopefully the government or somebody, the poor mayor in the village, is going to figure out how to move it. There's something very wrong with that. And yet, you know, we got all these wonderful things. We want to add layers and layers and layers above it. And we don't even have the ability to properly enforce it. And that's the concern I have. Not that this is a bad thing. I think it's wonderful if it works. Hallelujah, wonderful. Because I think we all see the potential benefits that can come from this legislation. But when the foundation itself is not strong, when you don't see that level of enforcement that's needed out, and the level of presence that's needed out there in the community, and when we ourselves here, who are now up to $1 billion budget, I mean, Guam Epa was 50 employees, primarily funded by the federal government 30 plus years ago, when our government was barely 400 million. Now we're over $1 billion. And Guam Epa is still in a small little shadow in the corner, and even far less effective in properly implementing its ability and its vast authorities to address enforcement. So colleagues, I'm just bringing this up because I think it's a level of concern, and while we can feel good about, hey, we did something great for the environment if we pass this bill, I still think structurally there's a lot of issues of deficiencies that are happening there, including the lack of enforcement. And yes, you can argue the limited resources, but you know what? I've worked and accomplished more with just as little. And I don't see that. I don't feel it out in the community to the level that we need it. That's really going to support the real issues that are affecting our residents and our citizens and things that we see and feel within our community every day. So I certainly bring up those issues of concern so that it's for the record, and colleagues be mindful of it when we pass legislation. I mean, it's feel good, but at the end of the day, how effectively in our structure of government are we implementing it, and how are we ensuring proper compliance with these laws that we pass? With that, Madam Speaker, thank you to the sponsor for responding to my questions, and thank you for the indulgence of allowing me to respond on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the bill, Vice Speakers recognized, and then Senator Taitukwi, and then Senator Dueñas, and then Senator San Agustin.
Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to rise and speak about this measure on Bill number 284-36 LS, and rise also in support, Madam Speaker, in support of, and thank the good author from, I guess, Barragata Heights, for giving me the opportunity to being a co-sponsor to this effort. You know, Madam Speaker, as I appreciate the passion of the previous speaker and acknowledge some of and a lot of the concerns that are out there, I must say, as one who's been here for 8 terms, truly appreciate at least to know that there are a lot of people in the community that are trying. There are nonprofit organizations out there. There are folks in the community, we all know Peggy Denning, who literally take the time to try and truly believe that Guam can be a greener, cleaner, and a healthier place if we all work together and come together and literally make Guam cleaner. The author of the legislation spoke about how the nonprofits of Guam Green Growth, the G3, the Global Chains Alliance, the bio blocks, and when we look at the mission mandate of reduce, reuse, recycle, we have to remember that this legislation is literally a good thing, and that we continue to look at legislations like this, and if there's changes that need to be made in the near future, then we will continue to come back. When I looked at the efforts of the vision or the mission of this Bill 284-36, which literally is relative to promoting recycling and zero waste initiatives, I believe in my heart that this bill expands upon the principles of traditional recycling by focusing on overall waste reductions, and promotes the research of innovative solutions to help address the rapidly decreasing life on our landfill. And you and I, Madam Speaker, know that very well. The lifespan of our landfill is decreasing, And as we look at other measures that were out there, I want to say that this effort, this bill, literally proposes to amend various sections of Article 3, Recycling Revolving Fund. It talks about the efforts of what is in place based on the recent, this term's Public Law 36-54, and it looks at making some shifts and some inclusions of even, of course, DPW, the Mayor's Council of Guam, and you and I know, Madam Speaker, that the mayors and the vice mayors in the villages really work 24/7 for all their residents in their villages. And I want to say that in their efforts of trying to get rid of metallic debris, literally, like the good senator from Chalampago said, right down our street, we still have abandoned vehicle. And when asked what is the holdup for removing that, there was a law that states that there needs to be a sign posted on that vehicle for so many days before it could be removed. And I shared that there was concerns that it could literally cause an accident from the people, from the folks trying to get out of that area, because that abandoned vehicle continues not just to be an eyesore, but an obstacle. But again, because there is a statute in place that there was a requirement that we have to follow, then I said, okay, I think we're going to have to look and revisit that. And until that change is made, we follow the guidelines. But Madam Speaker, this bill is good. I really want to thank the author for literally taking the time, trying to work with the agency involved, Environmental Protection Agency, to make sure that we try and look and saying if there's any gaps out there, we're going to work it. If there's any changes or any inclusions that we need to do to work with the different agencies in charge, like Public Works, Department of Revenue and Tax, as it relates to fines and fees and all that, and EPA, and just even the nonprofit organizations. This bill is a very, very good bill. And as always, bills that become law evolve, right? That the changes can be made. So I have to acknowledge the fact that this is a great, great start in showing the people of Guam that we do care. Madam Speaker, you and I know that when you were legal counsel back when I first started to become senator, we looked at the Beverage Container Act. That bottle bill, and everybody comes up to me and says, how come it's not implemented? Why can't we do that? And I have to tell our residents, we continue to try to work with EPA to see what we can do to get that implementation. And this zero waste concept plan is probably a good idea to segue into trying to work on that. We've made all the necessary amendments to that Beverage Container Act. And we still need to work on its implementation. But Madam Speaker, we know that we as an august body need to continue to try. And in those efforts, I'm here working closely with the author and the oversight chair to see what we can do to make it better. And I appreciate the passion that happens, because we all know that in order for us to really promote our island of Guam to the rest of the world, we need to keep our island clean. We need to reduce our trash. We need to make sure that if there's any creativity out there, that we give the folks the opportunity to try. I must say that G3 has come a long way, and even recycling plastics and bottles to make products so that they can sell to our tourists and to even our residents is an A+, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank them for their efforts. BioBlocks, which is going to provide cement, bricks, to build houses at a cheaper cost. better than cement or aggregate is probably a good idea. So we've got to continue to try, Madam Speaker. So from my heart, I stand in support of this effort, and I know there's still a lot of more work that needs to be done. We still need to work closely with the agencies involved, and I'm willing to take that effort with the Oversight Chair, and I thank Senator Paris again for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this legislation. I stand in support, and I hope that my colleagues support the efforts of this bill 284-36 LS. Situ Asmasi, Madam Speaker, for giving me the time. Sinamasi.
Sidus Masi. We'll now hear from Senator Taitigui.
Sijus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand in full support of this measure. This measure was actually, the intent of this bill was introduced in the 35th Guam Legislature, but it came up against some concerns, great concerns. And then after the 35th Guam Legislature, the author of this bill wanted to continue on to provide a great opportunity for involving not only the community, but making sure that the revolving recycling funding is used to reduce the waste on our island. And any mechanism, whether it's done through just the recycling or shipping it off island or finding some other mechanism that would support those initiatives. Even in the roundtable discussion, there was concerns, and I think that the author had addressed it. And one of those that I shared with one of my colleagues from Chalampago is being able to enforce, these new set of rules and regs that are planning to be promulgated through here, as well as, these programs that are going to be initiated. And it was concerning to ensure that EPA has this manpower to oversee this enforcement, especially when it comes to the program where it's initiating funding to nonprofit organizations or even the mayor's office or DPW to move forward on contracts. And there's always a pause when we're dealing with contracts. But one of the things that I really appreciated is the community involvement. And that's what we need more of in our island, to get people aware of the issues that will plague our island, not only the illegal dumping that comes around, that's been found in our jungles or in our backyards. It's also about being able to dispose of our waste. 10 years ago, it was easy for a recycling company to actually take plastic bottles or cans or cardboard and ship them off island to another country, a country that utilizes this for any type of recycling purposes. But unfortunately, we're seeing less and less countries wanting other people's waste because they have to deal with their own waste in their own country. It's becoming harder to find. In fact, we had introduced legislation in the 35th about a task force to address used oil. We're not going to be able to use any used oil on Guam in a certain amount of years coming up. What are we going to do with this used oil? We're going to ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel for our power plants. We're going to have to find a mechanism or a way to dispose of this. There are a lot of issues that are going to be coming up, and it's now being a proactive approach in this legislation to address this, and to address this now. One of the areas in here that was discussed was the Solid Waste Authority residential recycling program. I remember when we had a discussion with Solid Waste and asking if their funds, since COVID came, that they had lost some revenue, and if they're able to continue this free service to their customers to provide a bin for recycling. It was told to us that it's over 600, about 600,000, if I'm not mistaken, from the author of the legislation, to cover this free service to our to the customers. And because of the lack of funding, this will be jeopardized. So I'm glad to see that there's a section on page 20 that addressed this concern to provide some subsidies to the Guam Solid Waste to continue that free service. And to continue to have our community, to be proactive and separating our trash. You know, Madam Speaker, our economy is just not it's not just business. Growing our economy is not just business, but it's part of a combination of environmental sustainability. So when we talk about recycling trash, our waste, we have to remember that whatever we recycle, is the community going to use that? Are they going to buy the product? Or is it going to end up going into our landfill? So there's this balance that we have to put into play, and that's something that we're going to have to address soon on that type of economic balance and sustainability. This is just the beginning, Madam Speaker, and to my colleagues. The research on this is going to be massive when it comes to what are we going to do with our waste on this island when other countries won't take it. What happens when we don't have enough landfills on our small 38-mile-long radius of an island? This is the beginning. It might not be a perfect one, but we can adjust it when we see if anything falls short. I have proffered an amendment for my colleagues. It is on actually line 1724. The amendment actually said 14-21 on page 18, but because of the substituted version, it is now on line 1724 on page 18. My good colleague from Chalampago mentioned the concern about this scenario of where, if the waste is being taken off the island to ensure that it gets to its destination. That's a big concern for all of us. I mean, we don't want to be a part of anybody dumping anything in the ocean, not making it there and being able to be subsidized for, to fund to take the waste to another facility, only to find out that it was dumped in the ocean. That's something we don't want to be a part of. So what my amendment does, Madam Speaker, is it begins the double-lined area. It says, to Guam EPA, evidencing proof of delivery of recyclable materials, to Guam EPA evidencing proof of delivery of recyclable materials or similar documents for off-island recycling facilities confirming receipt of recycling materials from Guam. Evidence of proof of delivery shall be submitted to the Guam EPA no later than 14 days after recyclable materials are received by off-island recycling facilities. This is to ensure, Madam Speaker, that our waste is going to the destination that it's being paid for. So, thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, is there anyone who'd like to be recognized on the amendment? Senator San Augustine on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have a question for the author of the amendment. she mentioned at the very end, so we'll know where it's going. It's being paid for. I'm just trying to understand, they lined out the $30 to begin with, and then supposedly there's a subsidy or some benefit that the vendor has to ship it off, provided they provide the bill of lading or some means of documentation showing where it's going. What is the company going to get if they identify where it's going and they get a bill of lading? I mean, how much are they going to get any benefit from EPA? Are they going to get a payoff? Ship it here and you get a payoff. I'm just curious. I'm looking at the whole bill and I'm just, a lot of strikeouts. I'm very, if the author can yield to that.
Would the author yield to that question?
Actually, Madam Speaker, the beginning of Section 51308, Recycling Industry Economic Stimulus Program. It's a program that is to provide some type of subsidies to recycling companies on Guam to ship off island. Like we've had a couple to take care of all the plastic bottles at one time. So they have that same type of companies here. And what happens here is they will be subsidized for the off-island shipment of recyclables to recycling facilities pending funding availability and based on an economic sliding scale developed by Guam EPA that is based on factors such as fair market value and transportation. So this subsidies is going to be based on EPA's findings as they look to see the cost of facilitating this type of transfer. So that's under EPA to determine those costs on subsidies. Is that the question?
Basically, Madam Speaker, under the authored amendment, anybody that's in the business of recycling is in the business to make money. Let's start with that. If I collect goods that are free to begin with, I'm going to sell it to whoever will willing to buy it off island. And if you're saying if I ship it to this company, and if I'm the vendor and I'm going to make some funds, I can turn around to EPA and says, EPA, can you give me a subsidy because, it helps me? I'm just trying to make sense of this. If they're in business to make money, why do you need to give a subsidy when the product to begin with is free? I'm just curious. But I support the intent to make sure that there's a bill of lading and all that stuff, but it just bothers me that they struck out $30 per ton. Minimum amount, very cheap. Most of the business that did recycling didn't even bother that. It's just getting them to get it off island. That was the key. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Taitigui, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to.
I'm sorry, no. Did you ask for a yield? No, Senator Snogstein, you're done with.
Yeah, and thank you, Madam Speaker.
And I think yield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, again, and to the good senator from GIGO with that question, because once upon a time, these recycling companies actually would purchase these recyclables from the community. Like you can go get a bag of cans. Remember the day where you collect all these cans and then you can take it down there and they'll actually pay you for it. Because when they ship it off island, they also get paid for these containers full of these cans. But what we're finding out now, Madam Speaker, is that these countries that used to buy these recyclables are no longer buying most of these recyclables anymore. And that's where the issue comes about, that we cannot continue to fill our landfill with these recyclables and not even have any mechanism to turn it into something to reuse again. Countries are not taking wastes of other countries anymore, not like they used to. And it's only going to get worse. It's basically you deal with your own waste. And our island is so small. And I don't want to bring up the I word, but there are other mechanisms that we can use, which is pyrolysis. It's a mechanism to melt matter into fuel. These are possibilities that our island needs to look at. We can't continue to build landfills. But unfortunately, those days are not so much here anymore when it comes to buying recyclables, because they're not taking it anymore. So in the meantime, we have to provide this type of subsidy. Madam Speaker,
All right, so on the Taitagui amendment, Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I mean, I certainly support the intent, obviously, of this amendment to require verification. But I just wanted to ask the sponsor further. I mean, how do we verify that these materials are even being sent to a location or an operation that's actually going to process the waste? Because as I mentioned, one of the other things that is becoming more evident and as time has gone on, certainly since the days of the 90s and 2000s of westernized countries shipping off their so-called recycling material, is that many of these other jurisdictions, I mean, these materials being dumped in those locations, in these communities, and are not being processed. So, I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, I delivered it to this location, but how are we going to require verification? These are actually processing plants that are actually processing these materials, because in many other jurisdictions, they're not. They're simply becoming waste in someone else's location because these businesses take the money, they disappear, and they just dump the material. So I just wanted to ask, because I don't know that this necessarily, will that address that?
Would the author yield to that question?
thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know if I could be the one to answer this one, but I would only assume that if a country is willing to take, recyclables or waste from another company, they have a mechanism in which to turn it into something a recyclable product. The making of, I know that tires can actually be used for road, not road repairs, but to build roads, other ideas with plastics being turned into bricks that can actually build homes as well as furniture. So I'm not really sure exactly why a country would actually want to bring in the waste into their into their country. So, but I could only assume it's for those byproducts to be used to turn it into, or those wastes to be turned into a byproduct. But no, there is nothing in here to determine what happens to our plastic bottles, what they turned it into. So,
Senator Brown on the amendment.
I appreciate the sponsor responding, and again, Madam Speaker, I know we're not going to resolve all the issues with regards to recycled materials that we're generating in our community to hopefully have a second life or third or fourth life and be used and not become the waste stream. Because I have to tell you, when we did have one of the hearings with the head of solid waste, this was a few months ago, might be the previous manager that was there. But, much to my surprise, he had relayed because they were having difficulty being able to find jurisdictions that they could sell the recycled materials to, they were actually taking it and dumping it in the landfill. And that also they said that if the recycled materials were not properly sanitized, it all got dumped in the landfill. And which, surprised me because I spent an awful lot of time washing out cans and bottles and, going in my green lid recycled container and hauling it out every, couple Fridays. Now the schedule's been a little messed up, but I guess maybe next Friday will be my day to go and take my recycles out. But again, I think we just need to recognize, and I understand, the efforts here being put forth to address these issues, because obviously we can't begin to address them until we start talking and dealing with them. But there's already existing challenges now in the market with regards to the having locations of where you can take it and then being able to, financially afford the cost of shipping it there and hopefully that it's getting processed. I mean, in our day of information, we should be able to verify. I'm just saying as we go along this process, colleagues, be mindful because while we pass this, we're nowhere near where we're going to be. And as the sponsor had mentioned, if we're not able to process it here, When there are limitations to what we can process, definitely plastics can be processed. We definitely can crush our glass. I hate every time I take a clean glass and throw it in the bag because I have nowhere to take it. But the challenges are still going to be there because there's a bigger world market that we have to deal with and a whole bigger issue because we very much live in a disposable society. Everything's quick, everything's instant, everything can be packaged, and a lot of time and effort's placed into packaging and advertising and things that we see and identify visually. Children at a very young age, they know what the arches are, and even the arches are changing that symbol. But at the same time, we've become very much a generation of generating waste. I mean, I remember when I was very young, I'm sure most of us do, when we used to have, the wooden crates that we kept the glass bottles in, be your Fanta bottle or whatever. Remember the drinks back in the day? And those were recycled. They were taken to the store and they were recycled. That was pretty standard back then. And then we went to aluminum cans, and then, now we're hoping that there was a market for it, and you were able to get compensated by collecting aluminum cans. I remember the first term I was in office, we actually had a competition among the different schools, and all the money that the kids raised was returned back to their schools for their programs, and then, we had private companies donate money for prize money so that those that actually won received additional funds so that they could reinvest back in their school and their school projects. But we're also living in a different time, in a different world, in our ability to how do we process it, how do we reuse it. I mean, in most cases, these can be raw materials that can be reused. It might be more affordable. In some cases, processing is even more expensive once it's already been developed. So again, there are challenges that we have. This bill's not going to resolve all this. I mean, I'm looking forward to effectively seeing the implementation of this and this amendment that's been proffered by Senator Teitigui as some additional verification. But again, I think we'll have to see how it actually gets implemented. I hope they do well. But Madam Speaker, we were trudging not too long through the jungles of Marbo last year. And we saw how effective enforcement was being implemented here with regards to Guam EPA. So again, I remain hopeful, and I thank the sponsor of this amendment for elaborating further. Thank you.
On the amendment, is there any senator who'd like to be recognized on the amendment? If not, then the author of, Senator Parrish, you are recognized on the Teitigui amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment. I think it's, it's definitely a good guarantee or insurance that, what we're doing is responsible as far as recycling is concerned. And we don't want, we just did a coastal cleanup, and we want to make sure that, whatever we're recycling is actually ending up in the facility that's going to use it. So I rise in support of this, but I do have an amendment. I believe that I would like to basically reinstate the language of bill of lading. Again, because the reason for that is, one of the reasons why that was included was to ensure that there is proper documentation that it is being shipped off the island. And I think this is a critical document that was actually requested by Guam EPA at the time this bill was first drafted. So I would like to make an amendment just to reinstate such as with the bill of lading.
Yes, so on the amendment to restore the bill of lading, amendment to the amendment is to restore the words such as with a bill of lading?
Yes, that's correct.
Is there any objection to that?
Madam Speaker, I have no objection. I failed to keep that in the language there. It wasn't not my intent, actually, and I thank the good senator for recognizing that and including it in.
All right, so is there any objection to the amendment to the amendment? If not, amendment passes. Senator Perez, you still have the floor.
No. No closing statements for the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you. On the amendment? On the original amendment?
Yeah, I think I stated.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. On the amendment, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the Teitigui amendment? If not, then Senator Teitigui, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, though this amendment is, provides that transparency and accountability to Bill 284-36,
it moves toward a direction of circular economy. A circular economy is the amount of trash we create that does not negatively impact the environment. And that's what I think this bill does. And I ask my colleagues that to please support this amendment and be a part of this, this intent to address our waste on this island. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, is there any objection to the amendment as amended? Seeing no objection, amendment passes. On the bill, Senator Dueñas, you're recognized on the bill.
Madam Chair, and I certainly commend the efforts of the authors to, move forward and try to change things under this construction of 284-36. Try to see how best we can manage waste through trying to reuse, recycle, and the like. And so certainly that is a commendable and laudable effort. I do, however, share some of the concerns with the good senator from Chalampago. When I looked at the fiscal note, it basically appears, and it kind of supports the language, of course, that's been included, that you're really kind of reconstructing, at least in some part, the use of the recycling revolving fund. And so I did also look through the committee report, and there seems to be quite a bit of buy-in, really. And so I do this, Madam Speaker, as I said, I share the concerns brought up by the senator from Chalampago, is to put things on the record like we oftentimes do. So the two things I wanted to put on the record was, with all the buy-in that was indicated through the Mayor's Council and others and EPA, that we're aware that, we don't down the road get accused of creating unfunded mandates, that incur costs that weren't foreseen, or by moving monies around to support other implementations of the other projects. Well, and then maybe if deliverables aren't there, and I guess we're going to meet that out when we do the rules and regulations. So I'm saying these comments with caution. But those are the kind of things, Madam Speaker, that a lot of times we get accused of when we want to make transformational change. And this is the right thing to do. I mean, anything we can do to really reduce anything going to the landfill, and also, to reuse materials. I mean, it's just sensible. Many communities are doing it. And even as many of the speakers today have talked about, when I was at Guam Housing, we were presented with a lot of ideas, particularly where in Asia, there is a great deal of construction material that is being, put forward that is made of recyclables, namely in Korea, in areas where they do use septic systems. That's where a lot of their hard plastics are recycled into, making these small, portable septic systems so they don't have to go in and dig the ground out and put all the infrastructure in there to build it. It's cheaper, and it's a great way to use the material. So there is innovative ways of doing these things. But just in closing, to once again reiterate the fiscal note. Also in the fiscal note, as of April, it was indicated that they had asked EPA for any additional fiscal impacts, and EPA had not responded at that time. So as long as that's on the record, we understand, so that when we go through the rules and regulations process, and we go through, if this bill passes, and we go through the process saying we've accepted this endeavor, we've accepted to move these resources around and fund different positions and do things differently in terms of the approach on this, that it is clear that there was no indication in terms of what the fiscal impacts, and we did not create unfunded mandates. And I think that's something that we have to protect ourselves from when we go down this road. Now, if there's fiscal impacts that make sense, I'm sure, to save our environment, to preserve our environment, to do what we need to do to keep Guam green, clean, and, acceptable for all of us, and particularly our visitors, that's fine. But those kind of things are meted out through the process of what are the deliverables. And so since this statement has been made and there's no updated fiscal note, I just thought it important, Madam Chair, to put that on the record. And so certainly it's a laudable effort. We'll be present, hopefully, for when the rules and regs are promulgated down the road and we, take the next step on this endeavor. But certainly it's laudable, like I said, but with the cautions put in place and the understanding that there's much more development to come and discussion to be had. Sijus Masi, Madam Speaker.
Sijus Masi, Senator Dueñas. Senator San Augustine. Vice. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just got a simple question for the author of the bill. On page 16, you lined out recycling fees. Where's that being replaced? And if it's being replaced on page 15, that the Department of Revenue and Taxation will create, create the fees. I'm just curious. And I know it's going to go to a AAA, but the people of Guam would be very curious because there's 3 areas there that bothers me, or actually impacts me, and many others. Letter A, B, and D. A for vehicles, because I have a vehicle, and most of us do.
Senator,
B,
I'm sorry, what page are you on right now so I can,
page 16?
page 16?
Yeah, under the line 551,306 recycling fee. It's struck out, so I'm just very curious. A covers me because I own a vehicle. B, because I own a motorcycle, and I'm part of quite a few motorcycle clubs that will be impacted, and most of them own trailers like myself. And D, because I'm a veteran. And many of the veterans will probably be wondering, if you eliminate the fee, that means we don't get a waiver, that means we get to pay. And I have reservations on that when we want to take care of the folks that have stood to defend our country and our freedom today that we enjoy. So maybe the author can answer where's these fees now moved to and what are they?
Senator Paris, would you like to yield?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. So, yeah, just to reiterate, that section was moved into GAR. So if you turn to page 28 to 29 of the bill, it's exact same language that we see in page 16. So none of that was changed. It was just moved to a section in the rules and regs. And the reason being is that should the EPA decide to update its schedule, its fees, they can go through the AAA process rather than have to create a bill. So nothing was changed. The only thing that was changed, it was shifted to a different part of the law.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Senator San Augustine,
Madam Speaker, no, because when she identified it goes to GAR. Am I correct? Is that what she stated?
Yes, it did, but it restated it, Senator San Augustine.
Okay, it goes
On page 29.
It goes to GAR. I don't know.
Moments recess, please.
I'll take a moment's recess. Emina 36 in the legislature in Guam is back from recess. Senator San Augustine, you may
Thank you.
proceed.
Madam Speaker, as the author mentioned that they moved it because of GAR, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations. GAR is driven and determined by what the law is. It's not determined by what we think it may be. They interpret what the law is and they create the administrative rules and regulations. So if there's going to be any changes, they go to the AAA and it end up could be a bill. It's almost best that you do it. I would highly recommend that if it's on the code, leave the code and maybe change the verbiage that due to the times change, it could have a 10% or a 20% increase. And you set it up that it'd be annually or every 5 years. And that's how I recommend it. But to move it from the code to move it to GAR, I've got reservations on that one. And another thing, I've noticed on some of the parts here on the bill, they struck out the one individual to handle your, and then they identified 10% of the fund to administer and implement this article. What does that equate to? Does it equate to one position? Or does it equate to 2? Or does it equate to 3? I'm curious to know because as funds are generated, there's going to be an issue on that one. Are we trying to build another EPA? And the reason why I bring these up, Madam Speaker, is because I've mentioned this on another hearing in reference to EPA. When everybody talks about the littering problem or the abandoned vehicle, none of the vehicles are abandoned out there. The owners have littered the island of Guam. And as EPA can actually go out there and look through trash to find who's littering Guam, they can go to the car. And on every vehicle on Guam, there's a VIN number. It don't necessarily have to be in the engine. It's on the chassis, it's marked. It's labeled. That's how they build cars in the mainland. Or it's on the door. You can find who the owner is. And if the current owner at the time had sold the car, he's still liable because law requires that within 30 days when you sell a car, you got to get it registered. And if the owner doesn't take note of that, then he's liable. We don't have an abandoned vehicle problem. We have a littering problem. Everybody wants to find ways that we can use government money to move vehicles. If the owner starts paying the littering fine of $1,000, I'll tell you what, most of these vehicles are gone and it pays for itself. But in reference to what I started with, it's moved to GAR. I got a problem with that one, but I'm not going to stand in the way of progress. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. So anyone else on the main motion? Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Speaker Terlahi, did you raise your hand for the main motion?
Yes, could I have a 1-minute recess,
Sure.
please, Madam Speaker? Thank you.
A moment's recess. Y mi 36 in the legislature in Guam is back from recess. I'm going to ask Speaker Terlai on the main motion. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand in support of this bill, and I want to thank the sponsor of the bill for her leadership in promoting zero waste initiatives that can reduce our production of trash, our actual production of trash. And this ultimately is about the protection of our natural resources and our environment's sustainability. These are key goals of every agency, of every government. And this is how we get it done, by bills like this. So during the last term, the rules and regulations for the Recycling Revolving Fund were adopted by the legislature, which was introduced also by the sponsor of this bill. And so this zero waste bill is an additional step forward to enhance the use of the Recycling Revolving Fund beyond its current limitations, to promote recycling and hopefully extend the life of our landfills. In the Guam EPA's testimony on this bill, they said that since the passage of the rules and regulations of the Recycling Revolving Fund, that, quote, thousands of tons of eligible material has been removed from the island as a result of our collaboration with the governor, the legislature, and the Mayor's Council of Guam, unquote. Guam EPA continues to say, we hope to see a further evolution of the Recycling Revolving Fund as we transition to an increased awareness of zero waste principles with greater opportunities for enhanced services to the community. Again, this is exactly what this bill is doing. And we all know that illegal dumping and abandoned cars are real problems on our island, and that the legislature has tried, the mayors are working very hard, and all across our government are efforts to try to address some of these abandoned cars and illegal dumping issues. There are many limitations, as you can tell, and that inhibit our government from quick response, from thorough response, and from truly eliminating the continued dumping. But this bill will adequately fund, will continue to fund these efforts, enforcement, and capacity, and increased capacity to remove these items. It dedicates funding to the villages for white goods pickup, and it would build upon those policies and put a greater emphasis on encouraging zero waste projects and recycling initiatives. This is in addition to other work by the sponsor of this bill, the same sponsor, or the sponsor of the bill in other bills where we, as a legislature, amended the Litter Revolving Fund, which expanded the capacity and enforcement of against littering. And the Safe Drinking Water amendments that we've made to increase our regulation of lead contamination and unregulated contaminants so that we can enforce on Guam, Guam can enforce up front instead of waiting for the US EPA to come and enforce contamination in our water systems. Changes to the Tropical Energy Code, also done by this legislature, where we implemented energy conservation measures all across the island. And changes to our procurement law. Again, all of these, the same sponsor, where they implemented or required across the government efficient energy products be prioritized. And I just want to point out, some of the things, if I could ask the sponsor to yield, there is a question that was raised earlier, and on page 18 of the bill, there's a strikeout of the words from existing law that said $30 for each ton of solid waste recycled by the respective company as documented with a bill of lading or similar documentation. If I could just ask the sponsor, that was part of a sentence that says, recycling companies who qualify under this program shall receive, and it used to say $30 for each ton. It's been replaced by the words, shall receive subsidies pending funding availability and based on economic sliding scale developed by Guam EPA that is based on factors such as fair market value and transportation. So if I could ask the sponsor to yield, does she expect this to be less or more than the $30 per ton?
Thank you, Speaker. Senator Perez, would you like to yield?
Yes, I do. And yes, I do believe that this cap was not attracting recyclers to partake of this stimulus program, which is why why the language was changed to compensate them justly in regards to recycling, engaging in recycling. So yes, I do expect the cost to increase.
Thank you to the sponsor for yielding to that question. And so I want to point out that it's clear to me that the bill does not, except for that occasion where they may change what we're going to actually pay companies for picking up these products, but for consumers, this bill does not change the fees. So the fees that you're currently being charged for your automobiles and your motorcycles are carried over in this bill into the rules and regulations, and they are going to be the same exact fees that you were paying yesterday. It also maintains the same priorities on page 30 of the bill, the current priorities of the Recycling Revolving Fund are junk vehicles, tires, batteries, waste oil, white goods, and appliances. And the bill amends that to upgrade plastics from second priority onto this first priority list. And other than that, it doesn't change the priorities. The second priority is still paper, cardboard, and glass. And the third priority are other recyclables as determined by the administrator. So I'm glad that we are maintaining the same priorities, that these are still priorities, and that our village residents can hopefully from this still see the removal of those cars, and junk tires, and those other debris. I want to ask the sponsor to yield, if she would. If there is any change in this, or any part of this bill that would change the amounts that are going to be available to our mayors for picking up those abandoned vehicles.
Thank you, Speaker Chalai. Senator Perez, would you like to yield?
Yes, I do, and this was actually covered in the fiscal note. And basically, what it does, it adds two programs. It's a zero waste grants program and the reimbursement to Guam Solid Waste. So there is, but it's all flexible, right? The language is up to $400,000 for zero waste, and up to $400,000 for the Guam Solid Waste Authority. But it also allows for flexibility within the mayor's program. So, one day, hopefully, we can rid our island of tires and abandoned vehicles and white goods. It allows them to use that same program for zero waste initiatives. So there is the potential that basically it's the same pot of money that's being used, and depending on the priorities that the board decides on and the administrator decides on, there could be reprogramming of funding. But just to also let you know that in the latest budget bill, we did carry over the over 1.3 million, I think, to the mayor's council. So I mean, there's always opportunities to continue to prioritize the mayor's council program, to ensure that also we want to make sure that the mayors are I see them as a big part of the zero waste program. in implementing this. So we definitely want to continue that relationship.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Speaker Terlahi, you still have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for yielding to that question. I'm glad to see that, so the funding to the mayors was addressed in our budget. They should not see a decrease. I know that, you know, they also take that allocation and allocate it amongst themselves and how they see fit within the mayor's council. And that we have heard, you know, from some of the bigger villages that they've used up all their amounts and they want more. And so we will have to continue to address those things. All right, Madam Chair, I have an amendment that I think was supposed to be printed a while ago. I'm still waiting. I'm going to talk about it, though, if you don't mind, just in the interest of time. And that amendment is, if you look at, this is in relation to some of the comments by the previous speaker. So if you look at page 16 of the bill strikes out the current code recycling fees, right? And then on page 18 of the bill, section 51307, it talks about the adjustment of recycling fees. And it says the administrator shall review the fee every 24 months and is authorized to adjust. And that's going to remain in place, but what I'm going to do is add back in just a general language of authorization, authorizing that the administrator may add additional fees and then continue with this, that he can adjust and make a reference to the fees that are adopted by this act, which are the same fees, but they're put into the rules and regulations now. So I'm just going to make reference to those. And just to make sure there's no gap there, that they can continue to adjust fees and implement fees pursuant to the AAA.
Thank you, Speaker. Senator Pito, on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm just kind of concerned because I'm hearing that the carryover funds for the Mayor's Council has been denied.
No.
Well,
no.
I heard that yesterday that the carryover funds, and what I was thinking is that maybe if that's true, maybe we can allow the Mayor's Council to use the carryover funds for some of this removal of the scrap and everything else. So I'm just curious if we can allow the Mayor's Council to reinstate the carryover funds. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask that. Take Senator Terlahi's as an inquiry. Would the author of the amendment or the author of the legislation like to yield to Senator Pito Terlahi's request as it relates to the carryover provisions? Speaker Terlahi.
I find that equally concerning, and if we had relied on carryover of funds in the budgets for the mayors, maybe we should inquire of the Committee on Appropriations if that's the case, and why they are being denied by BBMR. I would like to hear the answer to that as well.
So with that being said, I'm going to take a moment's recess. The 36 Guam Legislature is back from recess. Senator Perez,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to recess till 2 p.m.
thank you. We will. Before we recess, colleagues, I've just been informed by the clerks that we will make the correction on the agenda as provided to us to include the bill that was not, that was supposed to be in as proffered by Senator Ada on bill number 303. Okay? Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you. Before we recess, I'd just like to wish a happy birthday to our clerk, Renee, whose birthday was on Saturday. Thank you so much.
Happy birthday, Madam Clerk. Si Diyos Masi, happy birthday and God bless you. Madam Clerk, we will recess till 2 o'clock this afternoon. Si Diyos Masi.